Good morning, boys and girls. So glad to be with you again this morning and to study from God's Word with you. So if you would join me in talking to God this morning for a moment before we get started, I would love to do that with you. So bow your heads and close your eyes and give God our full attention. God, we just thank you for both the sunshine and the rain this week. Thank you for the sunshine that gives plants their food and helps them to grow, and also for the rain that nourishes the plants and helps them to grow, and for the signs of spring and new life that we're seeing this week, and for the chance to get out and enjoy a little warmer weather and sunshine, and then to enjoy some indoor activities too. And God, I just pray that you would help us see the blessings in both times, both the blessing in the sunshine and the blessing in the rain. And as we learn from your word this morning and hear the story of Esther and all that she did and went through and the ways in which she trusted you to put her in exactly the right place, I pray that we would look for examples of that in our own lives. Times, God, where you have put us in exactly the right place, even though it may not have been something that we would have chosen for ourselves. You knew that's where we needed to be. I pray that we would see those things this morning, God, and recognize that your hand was in it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. So if you were listening closely as I was talking to God this morning, you know that we're going to talk about the story of Esther. And her story is one of my very favorite Bible stories to talk about. So I joked with Parker a little bit this week that this story didn't take a ton of studying for me, because it's a story that I've been studying a lot for a very long time, because, like I said, it's one of my favorites. And if you're an Adventures in Odyssey fan, then I would highly recommend the adventure called Bernard and Esther. Great episode to listen to. Okay, he tells the story of Esther in a really wonderful way, and I listened to it many times as a kid and an adult. Really, I did. Okay, but before we get to the story part in the Bible, I want to talk to you for just a minute about being in exactly the right position. Okay, because I've got kind of a little demonstration set up here, and I have some things that I put in exactly the right position. I have some pop cans over there on the table. Those are set up in exactly the right position. And you may notice that there's a favorite drink at my house. Not my favorite drink, but Mr. Tatara's favorite drink right there. Okay, and then I have this frame here and a ball hanging on a piece of string. Those things are also set up in exactly the right position. Okay, and because I set them up in exactly the right position, you can trust that this ball is not going to knock over those cans. Do you trust me? You do? I hope so. I've put them in exactly the right position, and this ball will not knock over those cans. Are you ready? Here goes. Close, right? But I put them in exactly the right position. I knew they were in the right position. They didn't know that, of course. And the cans are fine, right? So sometimes we have to trust that God put us in exactly the right position. And that's what we're going to hear in today's story about Esther. So before we get started reading from God's Word, let's enjoy a song. It's called Made for This.
Shout it out without a doubt. I was born for this.
Welcome back, guys. Oh, you want to know about my friend here, don't you? This is Elvis. He's kind of a Mr. Potato Head sort of character. You might notice something slightly unusual about him. In fact, right now, Parker is shouting at me that he's upside down. Parker helped me construct Elvis here. And you might notice something odd about Elvis. That's right. Nothing is in the right place, right? His eyes are at the bottom of his body, and his shoes are upside down, and his arms, one's at the bottom and one's in the middle, and then he's got glasses that are across his middle and not by his eyes, and ears here kind of askew here in the middle, and a hat off to the side, and a mouth at the top, and a nose even above that. Nothing is in the right position, is it? No, it's not. And what we're using as our kind of main point today is that God puts us in the right position, right? So Elvis is kind of my little reminder about that. Helps when we're in the right position. It's easier to do your job when you're in the right position. It would be very hard for a hat to do its job if I hung it on my ear, right? On the side of my body like poor Elvis has here. And sunglasses can't do their job when they're strung across the middle of his belly rather than over his eyes. Nor are his shoes being much help to his eyes either, right? So it helps when things are put in the right position. Makes it easier to do their job. Okay? All right, so you'll remember that we're going to talk today about a very brave woman by the name of Esther. Esther's story is in the New Testament. Oh, I'm sorry, the Old Testament. If you were listening closely, I'm sure you caught me on that. The Old Testament. And her story is recorded in a book with her name. And you'll find that book right after the one that we read from last week. Okay? The book of Nehemiah is the one we were in last week. And if you flip over a few pages, you'll find the book of Esther. Okay? And that's also right after the book of Ezra as well. Remember, it goes Ezra, then Nehemiah, then Esther. Okay? And those are the order that the books are in the Old Testament. However, Esther's story actually starts before Ezra's. So when we read in just a moment about the king who was in charge at the time, King Xerxes, he was actually the father of King Artaxerxes that Ezra went to before he returned to start the rebuilding of the temple, okay? And to help the people turn their hearts back to God. So here's what happened. There was a party. King Xerxes had a feast for all of the nobles and the princes in the land, and there were a lot of them. All of the royal people came. And the party lasted for 180 days. That's about 6 months. It was a great feast with all kinds of food and drinks. And they had a grand time. And then they traveled to the palace in a town called Susa. Really a city more than a town. And they had another feast and great party for 7 more days. And the queen at the time, Vashti was her name, she had a party in another part of the palace for all of the prince's wives and the noblemen's wives. Okay? So the men celebrated in one part of the palace and the women celebrated in another. And at the end of those 7 days, after having had quite a bit of wine to drink, the king decided, I think my queen should come. She's quite beautiful, and I'd like to show her off to all of my friends. And so he sent for her to come. Only she said no, that she would not come. She refused to do what the king told her to do. Now, this might not sound like a big deal, because today, if a woman told her husband, no, I don't want to do what you told me to do, it might not be that big a deal. The husband might be like, okay. But in those days, if you were the wife of the king, you did not say no. It just wasn't an option, right? But she did. She refused, and this made the king very angry. And the people who were with him, the other princes and the noblemen, said, ooh, if the queen gets away with that, gets away with telling the king no, then what's to say that all of the other women who are right there celebrating with her and are going to see that she told you no and got away with it, what's to say that they're not going to start telling us no and refusing to do what they are supposed to do too? This sets a bad example for all of the wives in the kingdom. And so I want to read the verses that tell exactly what happens next. Okay? This is how the king responded. So I'm in Esther chapter 1, verse 18. So that's where you can read with me if you're following along. Esther chapter 1, verse 18. It says that his friends told him this, okay? Told this to the king. This very day, the Persian and Median women, the women who live in our kingdom, the women of nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct, they will respond to all of the king's nobles in the same way the queen did. And there will be no end to the disrespect and the discord, meaning there'll be a lot of fighting and arguing. Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree, and let it be written into the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti, the queen, is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. Also, let the king give her royal position to someone who is better than she. So basically, the queen got fired. They sent her away. They told her, you're not going to live here anymore. They didn't want her to set a bad example for the other women, and they sent her away. The king agreed this was a good plan, and so he did it. And so the search began for a new queen. And he gathered all of the beautiful young women in the kingdom. And for the next year, all of those young women went through beauty treatments. They basically came to the palace, and it was like being in a spa for the next year. Lotions and perfumes and beautiful clothing and all kinds of things. And one particular young woman by the name of Esther was gathered up with the others. Her cousin, Mordecai, worked in the palace. And Mordecai and Esther were special because they were Jews. Now, there were a lot of Jews that lived in Persia at the time, but Mordecai worked in the palace, and that made him special. And then Esther came to live with the other beautiful young women who were brought, that is, as part of the search for the new queen. But when Esther was brought to the palace, Mordecai gave her this warning. He said to her, don't tell anyone that you're Jewish. He didn't explain why. Maybe he didn't really know why he was warning her to do this, but it was something that he felt God was telling him, perhaps, that they should not reveal their heritage. And again, remember, God puts us in exactly the place that he wants us, right? And so Mordecai knew that if Esther was chosen, that would be because God wanted her to be chosen. Okay? So he advised her, don't tell anyone that you're Jewish. And she followed his instructions. And she was, in fact, chosen to be queen. The king loved Esther the most out of all of the young women who were brought to the palace, and he crowned her queen. And no one knew that she was a Jew, not even the king. Now, a little while later, a plot was discovered. Mordecai, Esther's cousin, who had been taking care of her since her parents died when she was younger, Mordecai overheard a plot by two of the king's officials, Bigthan and Teresh. He overheard these two men talking about how they were planning to kill the king. And right away, Mordecai acted. He got a message to Esther, and together they got a message to the king's guards, and they saved the king's life. And Mordecai received credit for saving the king. This was recorded in the scrolls that tell all about the history of King Xerxes. The king loved to have his history recorded, and he had many scrolls that had documented all of the things that had happened during his reign. And this event also went into the scrolls. Okay? And you can see the two men were caught and arrested, and the king was not harmed at all. Right around this same time, King Xerxes appointed a man by the name of Haman to be his second in command, kind of like his sidekick. He was a man who was quite pleased with himself. He thought he was a pretty special person. He liked being treated as important. And in fact, he felt he was so important as the second in command to the king that everyone should bow down to him everywhere he went. And so that's what he declared. Everyone should bow down to me. That's what Haman said. And everyone did, except one person, Mordecai. Now, can you guess why Mordecai would choose not to bow to Haman? Because who did Mordecai worship, and who is the only person that Mordecai would bow to? God, right? So Mordecai refused to bow down to Haman. And you can imagine that this made Haman very angry. Okay? And so Haman hatched an evil plot. And I want to read those verses with you as well. So we were in Esther chapter 1. Will you turn over to Esther chapter 3 now and find verse 8? Esther chapter 3, verse 8. And read that with me. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, "There is a certain people dispersed and scattered among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, whose customs are different from those of all other people who do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them. I will put 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury for the men who carry out this business." So the king took his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. "Keep the money," the king said to Haman, "and do with the people as you please." So, who was Haman's problem with? Mordecai, right? Why was he mad at Mordecai? Because Mordecai wouldn't bow to him. But when he went to the king, did he talk to the king about just Mordecai? Nope. He decided perhaps if I just go to the king and complain about Mordecai, who works for the king, works in the palace, I might not get what I want. And really, Mordecai's a Jew who worships God, and that's why he doesn't bow to me. There are probably other Jews who won't bow to me either, should I see them. I should just get rid of all of the Jews. And so that's Haman's evil plot. That's what he talks to the king about. He tells him, there are people scattered throughout your country who don't believe the same way you do, who don't follow your laws. They're different from the rest of us. And so we should get rid of them. And the king doesn't question it. He hands him his ring, which will make any law permanent, unable to be changed. And Haman puts into an effect a law that will cause the death of all of the Jews. Now, as you can imagine, when Mordecai heard this news, he went into mourning. He was very sad. And the Bible says that he was wailing in the street, and he tore his clothing because he was so deeply saddened by what he heard. And so Esther can probably hear even what's going on outside, and she definitely had people come and tell her what was happening outside. And so she sends a servant with some new clothes for Mordecai, and Mordecai refuses to put them on and sends the servant back. And then she sends a message with the servant, find out what's going on. Why is he tearing his clothing, and why is he wailing, and why is he so sad? And so Mordecai sends a message back with a copy of Haman's law that says that she and all of the other Jews are going to be killed. And Esther reads those words and also reads Mordecai's wishes for her, because Mordecai says to her, I want you to go to the king and plead on behalf of your people. Try to get the king to save your life and my life and the lives of all of the other Jews. But there's a little problem. You see, people don't just walk into the palace in these days and go up and talk to the king. In fact, you don't even walk in and make an appointment to talk to the king. You don't knock on his door. You don't call him on the phone. There's no texting either. Instead, the only way that a person gets to talk to the king is if the king calls for you. It's called being summoned. Okay? The king sends a messenger to go and get you if he wants to talk to you. You don't decide to talk to the king sends for you. Okay? If you walk in to see the king and the king has not summoned you, there is a very good chance you could be put to death. And Esther knew that. The only way that you're not going to be put to death is if the king takes his golden scepter, which is a little bit like a cane, a golden stick that he holds in his hand, and he extends that to you. That's showing that he's okay that you're there and your life would be spared. And so that was the choice Esther had. Risk going to see the king, and maybe he would extend that golden scepter and save her life. Or maybe he wouldn't be in a very good mood and she would die. She knew what had happened to the queen before her. So she had a tough choice to make. And I want to read the verses with you that record her response. Okay, so flip over to chapter 4 now. Chapter 4 in Esther, and read with me in verse 12. Okay? Right before this, Esther says that 30 days have passed since the last time she was called to go to the king. And verse 12 says that when Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, when she gets her message to him that she's scared to go, she will likely be killed, she doesn't know that this is a good idea, he sent back this answer. Okay, this is verse 13. Do not think that because you are in the king's house that you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to royal position for such a time as this? Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, in the city, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will fast as you do. And when this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. And so Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. Brave girl, right? And that's exactly what she did, and what Mordecai did as well. She and Mordecai went to their separate groups of trusted friends and they fasted. They didn't eat or drink anything for the next 3 days. They spent that time focused on God, focused on praying and seeking His will and talking to Him and trusting that He had put each of them in exactly the right position. And then those 3 days had passed and Esther went to the king. And she walked in to his court where he sat on his royal throne. And I'm sure her palms were a little sweaty and her heart was pounding and maybe her body was shaking just a little bit because I'm sure she was still scared. But he extended to her the golden scepter. And then he welcomed her. And he offered her anything she would desire. Why? Why was the king in a good mood? Why did the king extend to her the golden scepter? Why did he offer her anything she desired? Because God put Esther in exactly the right position at exactly the right time, didn't he? And so Esther went on to present her request, okay? And she didn't dive right into the hard thing that she needed to ask for either. Instead, she invited the king and Haman, both of them, to a banquet that she would prepare in her living quarters in the palace that very night, okay? Maybe she wanted to talk to them in a setting that was a little more comfortable for her, perhaps talk to them in her living area rather than in the king's court after her heart had been pounding and her palms were all sweaty. Maybe she knew she would feel a little more confident there. That might have been one reason. Another reason might have been that she knew the old saying is true that you can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar, meaning that if you do something nice for somebody, treat them kindly, then they're more likely to do something kind back to you. Maybe that was her thinking. We don't know for sure. But in any case, she invited them to that banquet, and they went. And that night, the king asked her, "What is your request? I'm anxious to hear." And she said, "Come again tomorrow night to another banquet that I'd like to prepare for you, and I promise then I will tell you what my request is." And so the king and Haman agreed to come again the next night. In the meantime, Haman left Queen Esther's living area and the banquet and should have been really happy, but he doesn't look very happy in this picture, does he? Nope. It's because he passed someone who made him a little angry. Mordecai, who still refused to bow to him. And by the time he got home, he was spitting and sputtering and mumbling to himself about that Mordecai who won't bow to me. And I am important. I'm the second in command to the king, and I deserve to be bowed to. And what am I going to do about this Mordecai? And his wife put her arms around him and comforted him, and his friends came around him, and then they added even more evil details to his already evil plot. And they suggested this: why don't you find a way to have Mordecai killed now? Don't wait until the king's order is carried out in a few weeks. Find a way to have Mordecai killed now. And sadly, this cheered Haman up. Okay. Meanwhile, back at the palace, the king was having trouble sleeping. And he ordered that the scrolls where his history had been recorded be brought and read to him. And part of the record that was read recorded the story from way back in chapter 1, where Mordecai had been at at the entrance to the palace and had overheard the plot by Bigthan and Teresh to kill the king. Remember this from the very beginning? Mordecai told Esther, Esther told the king's guards, and they saved the king's life, right? And it was recorded in the king's records. Okay, so the servant reads this part out loud to the king, and the king is sitting back kind of comfortably listening, and then he says, okay, wow, so what was his reward? And the servant looks back at the record and says, reward? Well, I don't see that there was a reward. No reward, says the king. We have to fix this. And so when it comes to be morning, the king is still thinking about this problem, that Mordecai saved his life and was not rewarded. When Haman enters his court, okay? Now, remember, what's the king thinking about? Rewarding Mordecai. But what has Haman come to talk to the king about? Haman wants to kill Mordecai, right? Okay, two men, two different thoughts about the same man. Neither one of them knows what the other person is thinking. Here's what happens. The king says to Haman, what should I do to honor a man who truly pleases me? And Haman thinks to himself, what a great question. I wonder who the king wants to honor. Oh, who could he want to honor more than me? It's got to be me that the king wants to honor. And so, go big or go home, Haman thinks. And so he imagines this elaborate parade where he gets to wear the king's royal robes and ride on the king's horse and be led throughout the city, having someone really important shout out, this is the way the king honors those that he delights in. And so he tells the king this, this is what you should do for somebody that you really are pleased with. You should do all these things. And the king is listening and nodding and smiling. And, all the while, Haman is thinking, he's going to do this for me because I got to be the guy that, really pleases him, right? And then the king says, oh, yes, this is a great idea. Haman, you should do exactly that. Go and do this for Mordecai. And Haman's like, what? Mordecai? And the king's like, yes, he saved my life. And he was never rewarded, so please go and do this for him. And so that's exactly what Haman does. Dresses Mordecai in the king's robes and puts him on the king's horse and leads him throughout the city, shouting out, this is how the king honors those he delights in. Right? Remember that Haman had come because he wanted to have Mordecai killed. But God knew better, right? God put the king in exactly the right position. He put that servant who brought the scroll with the history records in it in exactly the right position. The servant did not select that story from the king's history to read by accident either. He picked exactly the right one, the one that God intended for him to pick. Right? Okay. So fast forward a few hours to that night at Queen Esther's banquet. The king and Haman come again to enjoy some food from Queen Esther. And finally, she explains the problem. The king is shocked that his second in command, Haman, would do something like this. Plot to kill the Jews and his very own queen, whom he loves and adores. And so he leaves the room for a moment to clear his head, get a hold of his anger for whatever reason. And as the king steps out of the room, Haman, realizing the great trouble that he is in, goes over to the queen to beg and plead with her. and he is so adamant in his begging and pleading, he gets so close to her that it looks as though he's attacking her when the king comes back into the room. And right about that same time, servants walk into the room to tell Haman that the gallows that he was building in order to have Mordecai killed on it has been completed. Haman is in big trouble. The king walks in, sees all that is going on, and orders instead that Haman, not Mordecai, be the one who is killed that day. The king goes on to give Haman's job to none other than Mordecai. He makes Mordecai his new second in command. And together, the king, Mordecai, and Esther work together to come up with a plan to save Esther, Mordecai, and the other Jews. They put together a new law, because you'll remember that anything that's sealed with the king's signet ring cannot be changed or destroyed. It can't be taken away. And so they come up with a new order, a new law to counter the law that Haman had put together to have the Jews killed. And that law says that the Jews can band together to save themselves. That anyone who tries to attack them, they can fight back and defend themselves. And they seal it with the king's ring, which is what you see them do right here. And they take that law throughout the land, and they read it, and it gives the Jews permission to band together to protect themselves and defend themselves against anyone who would attack them. Chapter 9 closes by saying that no one could stand against them. Why? Because God was on their side. Right? God put Esther and Mordecai in exactly the right position, exactly the right place that he needed them to be in order to save his people. So let's enjoy a quick video together to help us review this fact in another way.
Come on, Dad. Make her hurry up. I'm ready to go.
She'll come out when she's ready. Yes! Macy's here! The day can begin! Buccaneer Adventure Island, here we come!
Yay! Buccaneer Adventure Island!
Maisie, I know this is your first time here, but you're gonna love it! Oh, this is my favorite place as a kid. Come on. Where should we start? Oh, look, there's the Aqua Adventure or the Octorama. Oh no. We've got to start with the Buccaneer Blast Off!
Go ahead. Oh, sorry, kid. You're too small.
What? Next. Oh no, she's tall enough.
No, you gotta be as tall as the top feather.
Well, that's confusing.
How's that confusing?
It's fine. Look, I'm her dad, and she's...
Sorry, Pops, no exceptions.
See you later, shrimp.
Next. Go ahead. Watch out for the anchor there. Go ahead. Too small, y'all. Next.
But...
No exceptions, y'all. Next.
Catch you later, baby gator.
Next.
Aqua Adventure. Yay!
Aqua Adventure, yeah!
Yeah, go ahead, kid. Nope.
But
Nope.
Come on, Dad.
Next. Next. Here. Thank you. Yep.
could we get two? Can we get two popcorns and let's get two super splash size lemonades, please. Two island size lemonades?
Can't do it, Pops.
Small?
You can have a kitty-sized island lemonade.
Honey, don't spill.
Go. Next.
Hi,
What?
Wendell.
What?
Towering Inferno, sweet!
Uh-oh.
You forgot the keys again, didn't you, Dad? Great, what are we gonna do now?
The doggy door!
You may be tiny, but you're really safe today.
God puts us where He wants us, even someone little like me.
All right. How many of you felt sorry for the little girl in our story? Yeah, I did too as I was watching it. And then at the end, you saw her see that her size was useful for something, right? And so you knew that God put her in exactly the right place and made her exactly the right size for what she was needed for right at that moment. And so I hope that that's a great reminder that even though some of you are small or young, that God can use you too. So as we close in a song, I hope that you have a great week and that you watch out and pay attention for ways that God is putting you in exactly the right place to do His work. So enjoy singing this final closing song with me. I'll see you next week.